start. Welcome to Lincoln University. Welcome to BeLink Innovation. We are going to push boundaries to do better today, and we'll do that with Matt Cullen from Fonterra. But before I'm going to introduce him, I'll do some housekeeping with you. For the ones that do not know us, we're BeLink Innovation, and we are a business unit of Lincoln University. And basically, what we do three things. We connect people, and we do that through events, through co-working space, to helping startups, because we know when we actually start connecting people start to talk to each other, human nature. And then one of the things that is actually happening, if one person says something interesting and then the other person reacts, and there's a potential of collaboration. And we believe that if that collaboration is there, then innovation is something that will definitely follow from that. That is a little bit about us. Housekeeping. Today we are running a webinar. That basically means that it will be recorded and emailed after this. I'm just checking with Katie. Are we recording? We are recording. Katie, my team member is sitting across from the table from me. It will be recorded and emailed to you after this. There's a Q&A function on the bottom of your screen. So if you move your mouse around, you will actually see a Q&A button. Feel free to post questions there, and then I will post them to Matt at the end of his presentation. Look at social. If you like what we do, please follow us on our social media channels. But now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Matt Cullen, and we are going to push boundaries to do better. Matt is the General Manager for On-Farm Excellence with Fonterra here in New Zealand. Just a nice little fact, Matt is a graduate of Lincoln University. Matt, very welcome. I will stop sharing and the floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you, Vim. Just check I get screen sharing up and running. Hopefully you can all see that.
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Thank you, Vim. Kia ora tātou. Thank you for the very kind introduction. Vim, my name's Matt Cullen. I work at Fonterra in what we call Farm Source. So to add just a little bit of colour to the introduction, Farm Source is the farmer-facing business unit for Fonterra. Includes all of our retail stores network, our field teams, our service centre, and the like. Within that, I work in what we call on-farm excellence. And look, the easiest way to think about that, on-farm excellence is kind of the central support function that is responsible for developing a lot of those tools and services that our regional teams use to support farmers to meet our vision and strategy goals. So we look after development of those tools and services. We also manage our policy and advocacy representation where that impacts on farmers and farming. And we've got some R&D kind of capability in there as well. In terms of today, it's going to be a little bit of a whistle-stop tour. We'll try and kind of get over and done with sort of 20-25 minutes. But what we want to cover is a little bit of background in terms of, perhaps where we've kind of come from, give you a little bit of an idea of some of our strategic aspirations, given the ever-evolving landscape that us and our farmers are kind of operating in. And then a bit of a deep dive into how we're supporting farmers, to achieve some of those aspirations. And in particular today, want to kind of run you through some of our reporting and insights and how these kind of continue to evolve and enable farmers to position themselves, ahead of ongoing and oncoming change. Right, so a little bit of background, probably won't come as news to a lot of you. Fonterra went through somewhat of a reset several years ago. We had a change of chief executive and subsequent review of strategic priorities. We've been, for those who have perhaps done a little bit of homework, in the face of flat to declining milk supply in New Zealand, particularly on the back of some of those challenges around regulation and land use change, we've got some evolving community expectations, reflected in the regulatory landscape, and also our customers, really evolving and really accelerating their sustainability aspirations. So, strategy for us changed really, really significantly for those who can remember. We had a V3 focus, volume, velocity, to a focus on New Zealand milk being a leader in sustainability, and a leader in science and innovation. So today I'm going to kind of hone in on the sustainability aspect as that relates to our New Zealand farmers. Now, it's kind of easy to overlook, but Farm Source and farmers have got quite a long history around leading in sustainability, even if I think, if I'm really honest, it was from some pretty humble beginnings, right? If we roll back the years to perhaps when I first started in Farm Source, I think it's fair to say we had a few work-ons. It's probably a nice way to put it when it came to sustainability performance. I'm sure it won't come as a surprise to many of you that in the early 2000s, I think it was fair to say that a number of NGOs and perhaps the general public were pretty critical of our ability to get our act together. We had things like the Dirty Dairying campaign. In 2011, we didn't do our credentials much better when an audit, by then it was MAF, showed that stock exclusion was probably much closer to 60% than our self-reported 99%. So, nothing like a bit of a crisis to provide some clarity of leadership. And I guess, if I kind of take out some of the positives that come out of this, is some of the leadership that our farmers have shown, rather than kind of bury our heads in the sand. And let's be honest, that was probably an option for us. We didn't. Look, we really stood up and set ourselves some really clear standards. We benchmarked against them regularly. We developed some tools and utilized some really great people, as you can see on the slide there, come rain, hail, or shine, who provided support to those who needed it. And I think the results kind of speak for themselves. It didn't happen overnight, and definitely, involves some really challenging conversations. And look, really acknowledge that often the toughest landscape for leading in sustainability is with our field teams, right? When you're having the gumboots on face to face with our farmers. So a little bit of kind of history in terms of where we've come from. And look, I think whilst that's really useful, I think we all kind of appreciate that kind of leadership needs to continue to evolve. I mean, just ask perhaps Ian Foster at the moment. And in hindsight, although these programs were really successful, I think if we're really honest, it probably wasn't the most engaging approach either for our farmers or for our people. That approach of really, pushing everybody to the same place at the same time, had quite a limited lifespan. So I guess that there was a few challenges there for us, particularly in the landscape of ever evolving expectations. And I guess just to kind of give a little bit of insight in terms of some of those evolving expectations, obviously greenhouse gas emissions isn't the only thing we focus on, but just to give some context, of the scale of change and perhaps the balancing act that we kind of need to consider. And this is just around emissions. We've got expectations from government. We've then kind of got our commitments under He Waka Eke Noa. Then we kind of throw over the top. Our customers setting some really ambitious targets and challenging us in terms of how we're going to support them. And you can kind of see how busy this gets really quickly. And I guess the challenge for us is, how do we support our farmers and enable them to lead and continually improve? So I guess, I think we can all agree that our farmers kind of had their heads around this, around showing some leadership and ownership of some of these sustainability challenges. So our leadership challenge kind of evolved too, and it was how we can kind of move from that homogenous approach that we talked about earlier to actually providing our farmers with some options and services to support them to lead in sustainability and really demonstrate that continual improvement. And I guess that, how we could kind of utilize the strength of the co-op, and the depth of data and to provide insights into how our farmers are performing. That was one aspect we really focused in on. Another one was how we can utilize our technical experts to provide support and kind of really enabling our farmers to actually, show some self-leadership and lead themselves and supporting them to achieve their ambitions, which, I think, again, won't come as a surprise, but in many instances that leadership or those ambitions are to continue to support that really intergenerational farming model, where sustainability is really inherent. Now, there's a number of ways we can do this, and we don't have time today to run through them all, but look, I'm more than happy to connect that outside of the forum here. There's one-on-one support and farm environment plans in our cooperative difference framework, but really just want to kind of hone in on one here, and that is that's our farm insights report. So I guess a little bit of history around the Farm Insights report. It started off as us reporting numbers out of the overseer model, about 7 or 8 years ago. What we probably found out of that was reporting, single metrics. It was pretty expensive. Farmer feedback was that the approach wasn't that engaging, and it was difficult for them to kind of connect the actions on farm with those reported numbers and how those are influencing each other. So look, whilst we collect a raft of information from our farmers over the course of the season on digital platforms, 5 years ago we challenged how we could actually use this to better engage our farmers and provide some value to kind of drive that change. So we've moved quite a lot, and utilizing a range of tools and benchmarks, that enable farmers to measure their performance, identify some opportunities to improve efficiency and reduce their footprint, and in some instances, reduce costs and improve profitability. So I want to kind of take a bit of a deep dive into that now. Right, I won't bore you with a table of contents too much. The point I want to kind of make here is that when we talk about the footprint of biological systems, there's lots of moving parts, right? You can see from the contents here, and we were really really cognizant of the need to be holistic and focusing and identifying opportunities to improve efficiency, and all of these things contribute to that. The focus for us is about ensuring that being really wary that pulling single levers impacts on other areas, and so the focus for us is about to be as efficient as possible, and utilizing that efficiency to reduce footprint. You see from the kind of content here that there's plenty of opportunities to do that and to improve. We often talk about being the most efficient in the world, or one of the most efficient in the world, which is fantastic for us, particularly from a market perspective and a customer perspective, and a real credit to our farmers. But it is a bit of a double-edged sword, right, in terms of being able to demonstrate continual improvement versus resting on our laurels and perhaps waiting for some silver bullets. Now, kind of the first kind of key thing around insights and reporting is the accuracy of information is absolutely crucial. So this is kind of where we kind of lead with our farmers in terms of some of the reporting that we provide them. Our farmers are getting pretty good at this in terms of having really good, robust information, and there's lots of checks and balances through the digital channels that we use to collect that. But there's a bit of a check here in terms of looking at some of the key metrics to track trends and identify any significant areas. We do still get some tons that should have been kilograms, and we get some dry weights that should have been wet weights. So what we do here is just provide a quick overview, direction of travel, and sense check that information is as accurate as possible. We then I'll move kind of through the sections you would have seen from the contents page, and we'll kind of kick off with environment. So first up is we have is purchase nitrogen surplus. So one of the key metrics that we use to indicate performance on farm is purchase nitrogen surplus. Really simple metric to measure how effective a farmer is at converting purchase nitrogen into productive outputs. We've been reporting it to farmers for a number of years, so we can start to show trends based on their performance and benchmark against their production cohorts. So those are farms that are doing similar levels of production. We also provide so working from top to bottom here, we also provide what we call a nitrogen risk scorecard, which is essentially an objective risk matrix, which provides an assessment of risk of nitrogen loss from that farm system, and broken down into those relevant farm areas and activities that you can see there. Look, just a little bit deeper in terms of how purchase nitrogen surplus works. I won't labor too much time on here, but simply imported inputs from feed and fert and subtracted by those nitrogen contained in products. Right, nitrogen risk scorecard, really simple concept. What it is, all the relevant farm areas and activities sit in that. You've got stock management, feed, fert, cropping, cultivation, effluent management, and irrigation. For each of those, if we start at say stock management, you have a key risk indicator, and that's in between the two kind of bold lines there that you can see. So that the stocking rate is the key one there. And those risks are then moderated or escalated, but based on those other sub factors as you kind of read down the page. So if we look at stock management here, you can kind of see that the overall risk is high. The stocking rate is the key risk indicator there. Okay, and that's medium. The risk is moderated by the fact that the amount of dry matter eaten is low, but escalated because 100% of the time during winter, the animals their time is spent on fodder crops. Oops, I've gone too fast. I'll go back there. Apologies. So you can see that the overall rating is high. Started off as the key factor there, stocking rate was medium. We got some mitigating factors around dry matter eaten and wintering off, but then that was exacerbated because of some of the wintering practices. Similarly for nitrogen fertilizer, the overall risk is medium, and you can kind of see as you kind of work through. I won't run through all of the call outs. Nitrogen fertilizer use is the key risk indicator there. That's high, but it's moderated by some very low application rates. And that process is kind of repeated across all those other aspects, cropping, cultivation, effluent management, and irrigation. So look, at a glance, a farmer can kind of see overall risk and the factors that are contributing to that risk. We kind of move across to greenhouse gas emissions. This has really evolved significantly from us, reporting single metrics to farmers. And again, the challenge is kind of to balance those expectations that we talked about earlier on that timeline. I'm sure we all kind of noticed that the media focuses around the regulations on biological emissions, but also how we get our farmers to consider this in line with some of our customer expectations, which are much more focused on that whole of business emissions. And there is a risk here that if you view either of those in isolation, you can get some perverse outcomes. So you can kind of see in terms of key components, we kind of have our headline number across the top. So that's our full emissions footprint, so scope 1, 2, and 3. That's the focus for our customers and what we kind of integrate into our whole of business footprint for reporting purposes. That's then broken down into biological and non-biological emissions and the sources of those. So, I think that the reason that that's important, I think if we kind of look at trends over time, is that biological emissions have improved, but we've often offset those gains with non-biological emissions. And so what that means from a practical perspective is, we've got more efficient animals, but then we've imported more feed with embedded emissions to kind of support that improvement in production. Similarly to purchase nitrogen surplus, we provide some benchmarking against relevant peer groups. And then if we kind of move along to the right, we've got to focus on those local expectations and supporting farmers to kind of understand He Waka Kanoa and that kind of split gas model. So you can kind of see there, we've got methane both in CO2 equivalents and in kilograms of methane to give farmers raise some awareness around some of that potential exposure. We do have some benchmarking of those biological emissions there in the middle, and then we have some estimates of sequestration there down the bottom. Now, obviously, sequestration, really important issue for farmers around recognition of the sequestration that's happening on farm. But the reason we've kind of just given some estimates there, we're really wary of going down a pathway of trying to model that at farm level and setting some false expectations before any kind of formal recognition process is established. Keep moving on. This is kind of what we've got. This is new for this year, and kind of shows, I think, to the point we talked about earlier, kind of evolving all the time. But a much deeper dive into fertilizer efficiency. So, what we're doing here is using insights and data to understand where there's opportunities to improve how effectively nitrogen fertilizer inputs are utilised to grow pasture and crops. Now, I'll use a bit of an anecdote here, but the rationale, it's a bit like looking at whether you should buy an electric car, right? Fuel prices have made a lot of people think about trading in their vehicle, either for something smaller or perhaps a hybrid, or even doing the calculations on electric. Whilst these options have been available for a while, it's perhaps been that one thing that's tipped us over the edge in terms of considering change. And in this case, it might have been or probably seen as being fuel price. So similar things are happening with agriculture. It could be price, it could be regulation, or it could be management change. But I think the kind of key point is that you need to know the options, and at some point, you'll be motivated to change. Now, with going back to my car analogy, if we look at fuel efficiency ratings, if I was using, I'm sure a few of you have logged on to fuelsaver.org. If I was using 10 litres per 100 Ks, 10 litres per 100 Ks, but FuelSaver says I should be getting 7 per 100 Ks, it's easy to write that off and say, I live on a hill, or it's just not real world. But when you actually, the power of benchmarking, when you benchmark others around you, also perhaps live on that hill and find that the average is actually 7.5 litres per 100 Ks, you really need to consider, geez, is it actually me? Is it my driving habits? Do I leave the roof rack on, or do I set the cruise control to 105, or am I running around on flat tires? So I think the key thing here is, if you don't address those issues first and become more efficient, then you'll probably buy something based on a modeled outcome, and you might find that a smaller vehicle that should get 6 litres per 100 Ks, but with your bad habits, is you're actually getting 8 litres per 100 Ks. And did you actually need to change the vehicle in the first place, or could you have got better efficiency out of the current one? So, look, long story short, we're not trying to stop people changing vehicles or farm systems in this instance, but rather identifying where they could be more efficient, or get some of those efficiency gains based on decisions and practices on farm that need to be improved to get the best out of a system. And by addressing these, the farm's a better place for the future, regardless of what changes that they wish to make to that system. So I guess the kind of key parts here is in terms of how this fits in a farm system. We've talked about complex systems and need to be holistic, and you'll kind of see on the next parts of the report, we'll kind of talk about animals and milk, and how these kind of break down those metrics in areas that help to become more efficient and show up in these overarching metrics we talked about earlier. So purchase nitrogen surplus, and emissions footprint. So here you can kind of see, perhaps in the top kind of highlighted box, central to pasture-based dairy operation is growing pasture and converting that to milk. And we've got sufficient data points for those key elements required to generate an efficiency benchmark. So if we kind of look at benchmarking and opportunity, it's effectively showing how you're performing. So this is the graphic there. Effectively showing how you're performing against those 100 farms who are closest to you. So those that will typically have very similar climate and geography. The data that we use to kind of do that is actual fertilizer inputs supplied by the farmer, and pasture outputs that we calculate using an energy model based on Dairy NZ's dairy base system. So that's looking at milk produced and supplements provided, and back calculating pasture and crops grown. Now I think kind of acknowledging that many factors influence the response of pasture to fertilizer and potential yield. Some are not under the control of the farmer, but many are, and they're influenced by daily, monthly, or annual kind of decision making. Kind of like towards the bottom there, we're providing some guidance around where you might want to take a look next. If we take a little bit more detail here, what we're kind of doing, if we kind of look at the graphic, because appreciating that the kind of previous slide was perhaps a little bit difficult to see on the screen. The graphic there is covering your current performance and how it compares to your peers. Whether there's scope for improvement, and if you did realise that improvement, then what's in it for you? So I think that the absolute kind of key here is that this is based on actual data. It's not modelled potential. It's actually what your neighbours are doing. So you can kind of see in this instance, the light green dot is the farm. So that's my farm who received the report. The dark green dot is my farm potential. So that's if you achieve the average, okay, of those around you. If you were able to achieve that, if we kind of look down the right-hand side, those are some of the benefits that you might see in terms of footprint, both from purchase nitrogen surplus. You can see that would reduce, greenhouse gas emissions would come down, and also some costs there. And that's obviously at the moment with the price of urea at the moment is often a slightly difficult one to kind of keep up with. If we kind of we'll keep moving along, we talked a little about biological systems, and all aspects of those contributing to footprint. So the next one we kind of focus in on is milk. Now I'm getting well outside my kind of wheelhouse here with technical ability, but you'll be able to kind of see here that we follow a similar pattern with insights. There's a really strong relationship here around efficiency, and we think back to that really simple farm system diagram, that if you improve here, some of these metrics, then you'll see you'll see that reflected in those overarching footprint metrics. So you can kind of see here we're reporting average somatic cell count for the season, benchmarked against your relevant peer group. We have a monthly average of somatic cell count over the last 3 years, and we're kind of highlighting some of the potential there that if you got to level of 100,000. Now look, appreciate here that everybody won't be across milk production fundamentals, but the benchmark here is regional, and the 100,000 cell count is based on Dairy NZ research that there are productivity gains down to about that level, through decreased infection levels resulting in increased production. So a general rule, about a 2.1% loss in production for every doubling in somatic cell count. Another thing that we kind of work with farmers is around milking efficiency. So with telemetered data that we have, we can provide insights into milking efficiency and time in the shed. So we can see how the farmers performing there in terms of litres harvested per cluster, cows milked per hour, relevant to the size of the shed. And if you achieved efficiency levels of 80 to 90%, what that might mean in terms of savings around hours per week. Something when we were kind of testing this, that was a metric that really resonated with farmers. Obviously some other benefits here, but this one's really simple to grasp both from an owner and an employee perspective, and really key for us was about getting when you're looking at milking efficiencies, getting the buy-in right through the farm system, whether that's owner, manager, or the person putting on the cups, and that that engagement is really important. If we're looking at changing milking practice using tools such as MaxT. Next up, we kind of have a bit of a focus on the animal component. So the first one is heat stress. So this is built on Dairy NZ's Cool Cows project. And the aim here is to highlight the risk for farmers to milk production of unmitigated heat stress on their farm. So we kind of trialed this concept with farmers, and they'd often point out that their farm was slightly different, and regional information wasn't that useful. We've refined this a little bit to kind of localize as closely as possible to their farms using NIWA's virtual climate station network, and kind of showing some of those regional differences in heat stress intensity, and linking that to lost production, whilst kind of showing, you can kind of see the little maps there on the right, that trend over time and previous seasons risk. So farmer data that's used here is the size of the herd, the breed type, and the rest comes from that NIWA virtual climate station network. Lost my mouse for a minute. There we go. Whilst we're still on animals, we have a focus on mastitis and lameness. And absolutely last but by no means least, and I'm sure you're starting to see the trend here, right? Both graphics show farms reported mastitis and lameness incidence rates. They're benchmarked against all other Fonterra farmers. Mastitis cost, that's the number of clinical mastitis cases reported by farmers, and utilizes work done by Dairy NZ. Similar for lameness, that's the number of reported lameness cases. Obviously the financial impact of a case of lameness is really heavily influenced by the time of year that it happens. So there's some much more detailed analysis can be done, and I guess that the cost here probably should be treated as a relatively conservative minimum. So I guess I won't kind of labour on too long here, but I guess as you can kind of see, lots of evolution from simply sending out a letter with a couple of metrics on it from overseer on it to kind of where we are now. But look, obviously, like anything, levels of engagement will vary. I like to think the majority fall on the right side of this spectrum. But look, we're all really cognizant of the amount of information that farmers are bombarded with, and focus for us is really ensuring that our field teams, and our farmers are really across the contents of the report, and really aware of some of the opportunities that are available to them, and what some of the next steps look like. So I think hopefully you can kind of see that whilst each of the measures and insights are displayed separately, whether that's environment, milk, animals, etc., they all fit within that really simplified farm system diagram that we kind of showed earlier. So there's lots of small steps that farmers can do to improve that efficiency. And within each of those, there'll be different drivers for farmers, hence the display. Some of those are displayed as savings in time, improvements in production, reduction in costs. However, any of those improvements will show up, or improvements in any of those areas will show up in those kind of macro footprint numbers. So I think that's probably a good spot for me to kind of leave it. Let's see if we hit about a 20-minute brief.
Matt, thank you so much, and that was really interesting. Learned a lot. There are no questions online at the moment, and so for all the attendees in the webinar, please feel free to type in your question in the Q&A button, and as soon as they come in, I'll make sure that Matt receives them. In the meantime, while you are gathering your thoughts and putting your questions in the system, I'll ask the first one. Matt, this is the first time that the farmers are getting this type of report, or not?
It's not the first time. We've been providing what started off as 6 years ago, what we used to call the nitrogen report. Used to report some single numbers. Quite a bit, we then kind of built in some broader context around nitrogen loss was our initial focus, and you've kind of subsequently seen that evolution. But I think in terms of, is this a new report? The report that you kind of currently see now is about iteration 2. So most farmers, this will be the second year seeing it. The fertilizer optimization piece that is brand new, and that's, our farmers will be seeing that for the first time this month. So look, I guess short answer, in its current form, that this is all quite new, but it has been probably evolution rather than revolution.
Fantastic, and that basically means that the first questions are coming in. Mark Davis is asking, how are farmers embracing this information, and how will they be using it?
Yeah, really good question, Mark. So big focus for us, it's like anything in terms of maximizing the cut through that we kind of get with farmers. So really big focus for us is that these reports are starting to go broader, and they're also starting to go deeper. So first focus is making sure that our farmers are aware of those, and that's making sure that our field team have got the capability to be able to do that and work through these reports with our farmers. In terms of farmers using them, look, the big focus for us is not so much that we want to be too precious about this. This is really about us providing some information to kind of empower farmers to use with, it could be used with our sustainable dairying advisor team, but it could also be with their trusted advisors, right? It could be their fertilizer rep or their farm consultant, and kind of saying, hey, look, here's some of the metrics. Here's how I stack up against my peers. I can see a bit of an opportunity here. How can you provide me with some guidance to kind of realize this? So that's kind of what we see as being being kind of key to the report here, as kind of empowering farmers, I guess, to kind of challenge, perhaps some of their current advisors, where there are some of these opportunities available, and how they might be realized. And look, we're definitely not precious about who farmers kind of share that with or utilize to kind of realize those.
Hey, I have some more questions. Is there a benefit if the farmer is achieving above average versus falling behind? So I assume that the benefit is perhaps financial.
Yeah, it's a good point. And so a couple of things there. Typically, the kind of key focus of the report is what we're doing is focusing on efficiency, and you probably will have seen in there. For those that had kind of read between the lines, you can improve efficiency in two ways, right? You can either do the same from less, or get more from the same. The kind of focus here, particularly around things like fertilizer efficiency, what we're really focusing on is achieving the same production from less. Okay, so reducing that footprint. In terms of if we're focusing on achieving that, there typically, with any efficiency, there will typically be some, some cost savings on farm. So there'll be some financial benefits, but perhaps the bit that it's not enough time to cover in detail today, but there's obviously some kind of key metrics, and their purchase nitrogen surplus being one of them, that we recognise through our cooperative difference framework, where if farmers achieve certain metrics, in this case it's within the 75th percentile, there is a recognition payment, which is cents per kilogram milk solid as well.
Hey Matt,
so a couple of different financial levers.
Hey Matt, some of your clients probably want you as Fonterra to have some certifications in place. Do you think that it is possible for this reporting to link to some sort of an environmental certification?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I guess that's definitely something that's kind of front of mind for us. We kind of key focus in farm source strategy is how we can kind of make take pain points away from farmers and for want of a better description, make compliance easier. So look, absolutely focus of ours is how we can kind of embed some of these processes, tools into, particularly or to satisfy both some local regulatory framework, and also some of those customer expectations and some of their accredited frameworks as well. So the short answer is yep, absolutely.
We have a question from Edgar Burns. Will it replace Overseer?
Oh, gee, that's a really good question.
It is, right? Because it's of course a Fonterra tool. I know. Yeah, this question. Yeah, and interesting. Leave it up to you to answer.
Thanks. It's a really great question, and I guess you probably heard me talk about Fonterra used to be the largest user overseer in the country. We used to provide an overseer nutrient budget for all of our farmers every year. We had some real challenges there around farmer engagement, and then when I went to kind of a subscription model, probably became a little bit cost prohibitive in terms of the benefits that we were getting out of it. So we developed some alternative framework, and I guess for us, we are really promoting and supporting a risk-based assessments, perhaps as opposed to effects-based models. We just find that we can get very similar outcomes and be more effective at driving change on farm by using some of those tools. And I guess perhaps to kind of answer your question, we're probably taking it as a little bit of a backhanded compliment, given that one of the recommendations that came out of the government's review of overseer, was the development of a nitrogen risk index, which is effectively a very similar concept to what we've done here with our nitrogen risk scorecard, and something that we absolutely support, as a really effective tool to engage farmers and drive that change and reduce footprint.
Thank you. I have a question from our friends at Lincoln Agritech. The question is there a carbon sequestration calculation tool available to farmers currently, or who is working in this space to develop one?
The short answer is there. I mean, there are tools that are out there. I guess you probably saw from the discussion that we had is that we're really wary of utilizing those and I guess creating some kind of false expectations from farmers by trying to calculate farm level sequestration, particularly outside of the ETS. So look, absolutely a key focus in terms of our input into He Waka Kanoa. So farmers are very passionate. The feedback we get from them is that that they absolutely want to be recognised for that sequestration on farm. But at the moment, that isn't built into that He Waka Kanoa model. Outside of any vegetation that is outside of the ETS. So I think the short answer to your question is no, but absolutely being worked on, and a really key focus point for farmers.
Thank you very much, Matt. The last question that I have so far, but participants online, feel free to drop in more questions. Mark Davies, another question. I think this is very much about best-in-class examples. Are there programs comparable to yours in other countries like Australia or US, where yeah, where you can have experience from?
Yes, yeah, there are. Is the short answer. So we obviously, did quite a lot of scoping as we were kind of developing this. We are probably doing it. We are a bit ahead of class, particularly at the scale that we're doing it. For those that are familiar, I know it was Arla, I'm pretty sure, had done a very similar exercise where they'd collected a whole raft of on-farm data, across all of their supply base, and provided some similar reporting, utilizing some similar tools to estimate, greenhouse gas losses and potential for efficiency gains. I think probably the slight difference there, and the bit that we're probably quite proud about, is that it took them 2 or 3 years to kind of gather that data and put that report together and get it back out to farmers. Whereas this is something that we've been doing on an annual basis for quite some time now. And look, that we've just we've absolutely benefited from setting up some really kind of robust systems, and I'm sure a lot of you probably took from when we kind of delved into the history there. It was some pretty tough and kind of challenging conversations to start with, but our farmers are well and truly across this. And are really good at providing that information and utilizing some of the digital tools now that we can kind of support them with to make their lives a little bit easier.
Hey, fantastic, Matt. Hey, thank you so much. And I think this was a really informative session where at least I learned a lot. So hopefully the people in the room did as well. For everybody, so yeah, thank you so much, Matt, for your information and this session. This presentation is being recorded and will be emailed out to you. And I think what is left for me is to let you guys know that there is more coming from us here at Lincoln University and Blink Innovation. On the 22nd of September, we will embrace urban agriculture. On the 4th of October, we will have activator sessions. So if you're thinking of starting something entrepreneurial, feel free to go to our website, blinkinnovation.com, and book a session so that we can actually help you with your entrepreneurial ideas. And then on the 18th of October, we are talking about the next generation of foods. All of these, except for the activator session, they'll be offered virtual, will be recorded, and will be emailed out to you. Thank you so much for joining us, Matt. Thank you so much for being our guest speaker today, and I wish you all a very nice day. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.